Something is happening inside Fort Dix, and it's worse than anyone expected. Diddy hasn't even made it through his first weeks behind those walls, and already he's been caught breaking rules that could cost him far more than a few privileges. What we're hearing now isn't just another embarrassing headline, it's a sign that the version of Diddy sitting in that cell may be unraveling faster than anyone predicted. Because the story isn't that he drank. The story is how he drank, why he drank, and what this slip might reveal about everything he's hiding behind those prison walls. And once you understand the ripple effect of this incident, suddenly his entire legal strategy looks shakier, his future looks riskier, and his chances at an early release start to collapse on sight. Before we break down the details from the homemade drink to the fallout to the real reason this could derail his entire appeal, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next update. This situation is shifting fast, and every new piece adds another layer to a story that is already spiraling. Diddy's first real mistake inside Fort Dix didn't arrive with some dramatic smuggling attempt or a high-stakes scheme. It came from something embarrassingly simple: a cup. A cup filled with a homemade drink so basic, so low effort, and so beneath the myth he crafted for decades that the irony practically writes itself. Officials say he was caught sipping a fermented mix of Fanta, sugar, apples, and lemons, the kind of makeshift alcohol inmates brew when they want an escape, even a brief one. And that's the key here. This wasn't just a rule break. It was an instinctual reach for old habits, something he claimed he'd left behind. Because recent court letters had him promising judges that he was sober, reflective, newly grounded. He said prison had reborn him, that the old version of himself was gone. Yet in less than 2 weeks, that new version cracked. The illusion didn't hold. Inside Fort Dix, news spreads quickly. A man spending years bragging about discipline, control, purpose, caught slipping in the most predictable way possible. Not from pressure, not from violence, not from desperation, from impatience, from entitlement, from acting like the rules were suggestions, not boundaries. And that single choice didn't just earn a disciplinary mark. It created a narrative, one the feds, the judge, and the public will not forget. Because if he couldn't stay clean for 14 days, what happens at month 6, month 12, when real pressure arrives? This wasn't a drink, it was evidence, and the system took note. Once prison officials discovered what Diddy was drinking, the response behind the scenes wasn't casual, quiet, or brushed aside. It triggered a chain of conversations, not because the drink itself was extreme, but because of who made it, how fast it happened, and what it revealed. Fort Dix staff reportedly moved quickly at first, preparing to transfer him to a different unit. That's not a light punishment. It's the kind of disciplinary response they use when someone signals they're going to be a problem long-term. A unit transfer disrupts your routine, your relationships, your privileges, and sometimes your protection. Officials don't consider that over a spilled cup unless they already feel tension building. And that's exactly the point. This wasn't treated like a simple violation. It was treated like confirmation. Behind those prison walls, the whispers started immediately. He really thinks he's untouchable. He already making moves like he above the rules. Even though the decision was eventually reversed, likely because Diddy is still under a microscope and they want him where they can watch him. The moment exposed something crucial. It showed that officials are on edge around him. They're expecting trouble, they're anticipating manipulation, and they're bracing for whatever comes next. Because Diddy didn't just get caught drinking early, he got caught breaking the one rule he swore to the judge he understood the most: accountability. And now, every future slip, misstep, or misunderstanding will be viewed through this lens. Not as an accident, not as confusion, but as entitlement. In a place where perception matters as much as paperwork. That's the beginning of a very long chapter. The Fanta wine fiasco isn't actually about alcohol. It's about impulse, ego, and the one thing Diddy has never learned to live without: control. Because when you zoom out, the situation becomes almost too telling. This wasn't some high-level smuggling operation. This wasn't a carefully coordinated contraband drop. This was the most basic, bare minimum homemade brew inmates make when they're bored, restless, or craving escape. And Diddy, the man who stood in court claiming he'd finally found clarity, discipline, and sobriety, couldn't even make it 14 days without reaching for something to blur the edges. That's the part Fort Dix officials noticed. Not the alcohol itself, but the message behind it. It read like a confession without words. Diddy isn't adapting. He's coping. He isn't grounded. He's restless. He isn't rehabilitating, he's unraveling. And inside prison culture, that's dangerous. Because the moment inmates see a high-profile figure slipping this early, the respect shifts, the power dynamic tilts, the myth of invincibility cracks. Suddenly, you're not the mogul who built an empire. You're the guy who couldn't survive 2 weeks without a homemade distraction. It also paints a clear picture to the feds. This is someone who still thinks he can bend his circumstances, skirt rules, and navigate confinement the same way he navigated public scandals with charm, bravado, and shortcuts. But shortcuts inside a federal prison don't save you. They expose you. And if this is the behavior he's displaying publicly, imagine what's happening quietly, in conversations, favors, alliances, and backdoor arrangements. This wasn't just a drink. It was a preview, a warning sign, a glimpse into exactly why officials are preparing to watch him like a hawk. On paper, getting caught with a cup of jailhouse Fanta brew sounds small, almost laughable, but inside a federal facility, nothing is ever just what it looks like. Especially when the inmate is someone like Diddy, whose name brings attention, influence, and complications the Bureau of Prisons would rather avoid than entertain. Because here's the truth, a minor violation is never minor when it reveals a pattern. Prison officials don't care that it was homemade alcohol. They care that it was a test, and Diddy failed it instantly. They care that he broke rules with the confidence of someone who expected not to face consequences. And more importantly, they care that he's signaling a mindset that can escalate into bigger problems down the line. This is exactly how monitoring begins. When the staff sees an inmate pushing boundaries early, they start documenting. They start watching for patterns. They start paying attention to who he talks to, who facilitates things, and who benefits. Every misstep becomes a data point. Every warning becomes a file note. Every choice becomes evidence. And with Diddy's history, his reputation, his connections, officials are not about to give him room to get comfortable. Because an inmate with money, ego, and influence doesn't need a weapon or a smuggled package to create chaos. All he needs is a network. And when that network starts forming behind the scenes, little incidents like this become the red flags that tell prison administrators, watch this one closely. The irony is painful. Diddy wanted Fort Dix because it was supposed to be easier. Now Fort Dix might become the very place where every move he makes is written down, logged, and prepared as evidence if future discipline becomes necessary. It's no longer about the drink. It's about the pattern he just confirmed. The real issue isn't the alcohol, it's what the alcohol reveals. For weeks, Diddy has been insisting he's a changed man. He stood in front of a federal judge and declared he was finally sober. He told his family he was committed to growth. He told the public that prison had reborn him and killed off the version of himself responsible for the chaos that destroyed his empire. But actions always expose the truth long before words do. And now, 2 weeks into his sentence, 2 weeks, he's already breaking the one rule he claimed to find his new identity. This incident doesn't just crack his credibility, it shatters the foundation of the narrative his legal team spent months trying to build. Because when you strip away the headlines and the noise, the message becomes painfully simple. If Diddy can't stay clean under supervision, what happens when he's out in the world with freedom at his fingertips? Judges look at patterns, probation officers look at consistency. Pardons require proof of transformation, not a speech about one. This misstep now lives permanently in his file, a record that will follow him into his appeal, into his pardon attempt, into every future review of his behavior, and it casts doubt over everything he has said so far. Every promise about sobriety, every claim about accountability, every declaration of personal growth. If you can't stay sober in the one place where sobriety is supposed to be the easiest outcome, it raises a question nobody around him wants to answer. Was the new Diddy ever real, or was it just another performance? This is where the consequences move from disciplinary to psychological. It's not the punishment that will sting, it's the fact that all the work put into rebuilding his image, legally and publicly, just took a hit he may not be able to recover from. And behind those prison walls, credibility is currency. Once you lose it, you lose leverage, protection, and positioning. And Diddy may have just spent more of it than he can afford. What happened next is what really grabbed my attention, because Fort Dix didn't just shrug this off as some harmless jailhouse mistake. They moved fast, they moved decisively, and they moved in a way that tells you they've already been watching him. The moment officials confirmed he'd been drinking, even if it was just a homemade Fanta cocktail, they immediately initiated a transfer. That means they weren't treating this like a minor slip. They were treating it like a behavioral red flag. And here's what most people don't realize. In prison, when they move you, it's rarely just about punishment. It's about containment. Containment of influence. Containment of reputation. Containment of potential trouble. Officials were essentially signaling, we see the pattern forming, we see the attempts to show off, and we're not playing with you. Even though they reversed the transfer later, the damage was already done. Because once the staff marks you as someone who breaks rules early, someone who tests boundaries, that follows you everywhere. Every guard knows, every supervisor knows, every shift change notes it, every evaluation includes it. You are no longer inmate adjusting. You become inmate who ignores warnings. And that's the part Diddy probably didn't expect. Prison isn't Hollywood. You don't charm your way out of consequences. You don't negotiate with staff. You don't explain it away. Behind those walls, your record speaks louder than your words. And Diddy's record now shows a man who claimed sobriety, then drank within 14 days, promised discipline, then broke rules immediately, told the judge he changed, then proved he didn't want. This is the kind of misstep that may not seem huge on the surface, but becomes a massive obstacle when the appeals court reviews his file, or when any discussion of early release, good time credits, or privileged assignments comes up. It puts him in a category no celebrity wants to be in: high risk for relapse, high risk for rule violations, and low trust with staff. And the truth is, once a prison labels you that way, it is almost impossible to shake, even harder than shaking a public scandal. This wasn't just a warning, it was a shift in how the system now sees him. And that shift changes everything about what comes next. The part that turns this situation from messy to catastrophic is what it does to Diddy's own narrative, the one he sold to the judge, the public, and even his supporters. Because remember, just weeks ago, he stood in court claiming he was finally sober after 25 years. He told the judge he'd been reborn, that prison forced him into awakening, that the old him had died behind bars. That speech wasn't just emotional theater, it was strategic. It was meant to influence sentencing. It was meant to soften perception. It was meant to paint him as a man on a redemption arc. But now, 2 weeks into his term, and he's already brewing his own alcohol, like a middle schooler doing a science experiment in the basement. This single behavior instantly fractures the entire foundation of the new me performance he tried to present. And prison staff aren't blind to this. They know how often inmates claim they've changed. They know how often people promise transformation. They know how to spot sincerity versus convenience. When someone breaks their own vows this quickly, it sends a very clear message. The speech was never about accountability. It was about optics. This incident doesn't just contradict his statements, it undermines his credibility in every future step. Judges see it, parole boards see it, probation officers see it, federal oversight sees it. You can't stand in court saying "I'm done with substances forever," and then mix your own alcohol before the ink on the sentencing paperwork dries. And that's the deeper consequence here. This isn't about a drink, it's about what the drink reveals: a lack of discipline, a lack of sincerity, a lack of respect for the process, a lack of genuine change. This turns his appeal into an uphill battle. It turns his pardon dreams into wishful thinking. It turns his probation prospects into a ticking time bomb. Because if he can't stay clean in a controlled environment, surrounded by cameras, staff, and consequences, how could anyone trust him to follow the rules outside? This is the part that makes everything unravel. Not the alcohol itself, but what that alcohol proves. What makes this situation even more devastating for Diddy isn't the alcohol itself, it's how perfectly it plays into the exact fears prosecutors raised during his trial. They argued that he struggles with impulse control. They argued that he bends rules when he believes he can. They argued that he treats consequences as optional. And now, inside one of the most monitored federal facilities in the country, he has proven them right in record time. Not months into his sentence, not weeks, barely 2 rotations of the prison meal schedule, and he's already logged his first violation. For someone banking on an appeal, this is a nightmare. Appeals aren't just about legal paperwork, they also revolve around perception. Judges want to see patterns, consistency, effort. They want proof that the individual they're considering has actually changed. This incident becomes an immediate counter-argument against any claim that Diddy deserves leniency. It becomes a shorthand for "he can't help himself." It becomes Exhibit A for why early release isn't just unlikely, it's risky. And then there's the pardon fantasy. He's been telling anyone who will listen that a political miracle is coming, that someone powerful will swoop in and rewrite fate for him. But political pardons aren't simply based on influence, they rely heavily on optics. And the optics here are disastrous. What politician wants to attach their name to someone who can't even go 14 days without breaking rules in a federal facility? What administration wants to champion someone who preaches redemption in court, yet stumbles at the first sign of temptation? What leader wants headlines that read, "Pardoned inmate violates sobriety almost immediately"? This is the kind of slip politicians run away from, not toward. And if that weren't enough, there's the probation shadow hanging over everything. Because even if by some miracle his appeal goes through or his sentence shortens, the 5-year probation period waiting on the other side doesn't bend. Probation isn't flexible. Probation doesn't care about celebrity. Probation doesn't forgive a history of relapses. If he can't stay clean for 14 days in prison, the question becomes colder, harsher, and more honest. How long would he last on the outside? This one mistake isn't just a misstep. It's the kind of moment that follows a case like a watermark, invisible until someone shines a light on it, and then it reveals everything. The biggest misunderstanding people have right now is treating this alcohol incident like it's some harmless slip-up, a tiny infraction in an otherwise enormous legal saga. But inside a federal prison system, there is no such thing as tiny. Every action is recorded. Every violation becomes a permanent part of the inmate's institutional file, and every mark on that file becomes a narrative about who you are when nobody is watching. This is exactly why Diddy's situation has shifted from concerning to consequential. Because this violation didn't happen in year 3 of his sentence, it didn't happen after a long stretch of good behavior. It happened immediately, almost reflexively, the moment the structure of prison pressed against his habits. That's what worries officials. It shows a pattern, not an accident. And inside Fort Dix, patterns matter more than promises. To the system, this isn't about alcohol. It's about discipline. It's about whether an inmate respects boundaries. It's about whether someone who spent a lifetime controlling rooms, assistants, entourages, industries can function in an environment where he controls nothing. This is the test most people fail quietly. For Diddy, it's happening under a spotlight he created himself. He walked into Fort Dix expecting influence, expecting comfort, expecting exceptions. Instead, he ran into the same rules every other inmate lives under, and the moment those rules felt inconvenient, he pushed back. That's what the Bureau sees. That's what goes into reports. That's what follows him to every hearing, every review, every future decision. And the danger isn't just the strike on his record, it's the ripple effect. Because now staff are alert, inmates are watching, officials are documenting, and the federal government is taking mental notes about whether the man they just convicted can function even under basic supervision. The question is no longer, did he break a rule? The question is, what will he break next? And once a prisoner gets that reputation, the system treats them differently. The surveillance shifts, the tone changes, and the opportunities, early release, work assignments, privileges begin to dry up quietly, without announcing themselves. This one misstep isn't isolated. It's a warning flare, one the system won't forget. What most people don't realize is that prisons operate on rhythm. Every inmate learns it, every guard enforces it, every unit depends on it. And when someone breaks that rhythm, especially someone high profile, the entire environment adjusts. That's what's happening now. Inside Fort Dix, Diddy isn't just another inmate caught bending a rule. He's a destabilizer, someone whose presence changes how others behave, how staff communicate, and how administrators plan ahead. And after this alcohol incident, that shift has become impossible to ignore. Guards who were once neutral are now alert. Inmates who viewed him as entertainment are becoming cautious. Supervisors who were previously hands-off are now quietly documenting everything. It's subtle, the kind of institutional shift that doesn't announce itself, but it's real. Because when someone shows they're willing to break rules this early, before boredom sets in, before desperation kicks in, before the routine wears them down, staff interpret it as a sign of future disruption, a preview of what's to come. And Fort Dix has seen this type before. Inmates who enter believing they're the exception. Inmates who think influence on the outside translates to influence inside. Inmates who underestimate how quickly a reputation can shift from celebrity to problem. Once that label sticks, everything changes. Searches become more frequent, movement becomes more restricted, privileges become harder to earn, reports become more detailed, and all of it happens quietly, through procedure. The one thing prison is designed to execute flawlessly. What's even more telling is how other inmates react. Because inside any facility, their perception becomes its own currency, and right now, whispers travel faster than facts. The story isn't that Diddy drank. The story is that Diddy got caught, and in prison, being catchable is a weakness. To some, it signals vulnerability. To others, opportunity. To the institution, liability. The slow tightening has already begun. Not with punishment, but with attention. The kind that doesn't feel loud until it surrounds you. This is no longer about a sip of prison-made alcohol. It's about a man who once controlled every room suddenly becoming the most monitored figure in a building designed for compliance. Fort Dix doesn't need to punish him harshly. They just need to watch. Because when someone shows you who they are on day 10, the system prepares for who they'll be by month 10. And that's the shift Diddy is walking into, whether he realizes it or not. The real danger for Diddy isn't the punishment he got today. It's the paper trail that's beginning to form, slowly, quietly, and with the kind of precision only a federal institution can maintain. Because one violation inside a low-security facility doesn't just disappear, it becomes a data point. And when you pile data points together, you get a pattern. And patterns are what judges, parole boards, and prosecutors pay attention to. This is where the long game begins. The Bureau of Prisons isn't looking at this incident as a simple alcohol violation. They're looking at it as early evidence of conduct, evidence of how Diddy is likely to behave over the next 2 years, and even more importantly, over the 5 years of probation waiting for him outside. This one slip will echo far past today. It can influence how strict his future supervision becomes, how probation officers treat him the day he walks out, whether he's allowed travel privileges, whether a judge grants leniency if he violates anything later, how credible his rehabilitation claims sound during appeals, because courts do not reward people who claim transformation while breaking rules nearly 2 weeks into their sentence. That contradiction alone becomes ammunition. Ammunition for any prosecutor who wants to argue he's unchanged, untrustworthy, and unserious. And it gets deeper. Inside Fort Dix, inmates are already reacting. Some see this as proof that Diddy isn't protected. Others see it as proof that he's not adapting well. And both interpretations make him more vulnerable. In prison, the most dangerous label is unstable. The second most dangerous is watched. Diddy is now both. And as the institution collects more information on him, not necessarily to punish but to prepare, this becomes a story with ripple effects. A story that could alter his appeal narrative, derail any claims of early release, and invite more scrutiny into every movement he makes. This isn't the kind of mistake you just move on from. It follows you, step by step, until the day you walk out, or until the system decides that you won't. And there you have it. Another chapter in the ongoing saga of a man who swore prison would change him, but can't even make it 2 weeks without proving he's the same person who walked in. If this is how he behaves under the easiest part of his sentence, imagine what the next 2.5 years look like. Imagine what 5 years of probation will turn into. Imagine the headlines when the next slip, and there will be a next slip, comes to light. Because at this point, the system isn't asking, will Diddy violate? The question is, how soon and how big? And trust me, we'll be right here when the next chapter drops. If you've been following this case with us, make sure you stay locked in. Like the video to keep the story moving. Comment below, do you think this alcohol incident is the beginning of a longer pattern, or the moment everything shifts? And subscribe to Fame Insight so you never miss the updates the mainstream won't touch. This story is nowhere near finished, and the next twist might be closer than any of us think. Fame Insight, where the whispers get loud,